Hello, everyone. Um, so we have our speaker here, Carla Ortiz. So, Carla, I'm gonna make you co-host so you can share your screen. And
You?
okay, let's wait 2 minutes while we so we can start on time and we get more audience. All right, so I'm gonna introduce the presenter. Um, this presentation is entitled I Am a Black Female English Teacher, an Autoethnographic Perspective to Teacher Education by Carla Andrea Ortiz Gomez from Universidad Distrital Francisco José de Caldas. Carla Ortiz is a student in the bachelor program Lenguas Extranjeras con emphasis en inglés of Distrital University. She belongs to Incopra Research Seedbed, where she explores Black identity, race theory, and decoloniality. Drawing on testimonials and hegemonic practices in her teaching, she integrates critical perspectives on coloniality and cultural memory to foster inclusive learning environments. Her work aims to challenge dominant discourses and amplify marginalized voices within language education. Passionate about decolonial practices, Carla continually reflects on her own ontological journey through race and power dynamics. So, welcome, and the room is yours.
Thank you so much. So, good morning, everyone. My name is, as he already said, Carla Ortiz, and I'm about to share with you my article. So, to start talking about my article, I must say that I'm not just a woman, but a Black woman. And who I am is not the same who I am being, since now I am aware that I have been perceived differently. So my body, my identity, even my own femininity has been packed with some racialized discourses. I am a Black woman who has begun to integrate her identity and Black female perception to challenge academic disposition. So what I'm about to tell you is the way that I decided to resist in the same system that has erased all Black epistemologies and hide their identity. So my experience as a Black female English teacher in Colombia has been characterized by having mostly white and cisgender educators that consciously or unconsciously has forced me to resort or coping strategies such as identity masking. So I have to mask who I am to avoid disrespect, to pretend that I'm visible, to pretend that I belong. So I would say that from seminars to the curriculum in general, Black bodies, Black epistemologies, Black feminities, and they are absent. And not they are not absent just because they are not there or they are not included. They are absent because their own lack of enunciation are distorted. So this is why the purpose of this study is to produce my own reality, so it can be a source of epistemological reflection and also a source of healing. And that's why the um, the participant of this article is myself, because I walk through my testimonials that are packed with racialization, healing, and resistance. And it's like a constant process. So the research questions of this article is: how does my lived experience as a Black female pre-service English teacher, examined through testimonials, reveal the epistemic violence of teacher education while constructing pathways for resistance and self-affirmation? Therefore, the research objectives are: the general one is to explore and analyze my life experience as a Black female pre-service English teacher in a predominantly white, male, and cisgender academic space in the distrital university using an autoethnographic approach. And the specific ones are to give flesh to my identity construction as a Black female English pre-service teacher by analyzing my testimonials as acts of resistance and resistance against epistemic erasure in academia. The second one is to disrupt colonial academic spaces and process by centering my lived experience and knowledge as a Black female English pre-service teacher, challenging dominant narratives and reclaiming silence epistemologies. So the theoretical framework of my study is composed for some constructs. They are intertwined, so they need to be understood as interconnected orientations in their epistemological and ontological dimensions. And these interconnections intends to demonstrate the way these constructs join together and how they are in constant movement, and therefore create an ontological otherwise. So I anchor the zone of non-being from Fanon, race, and gender from an intersectional lens, and the Black English language teacher identity construction. So let me talk about each one in more detail. So the zone of non-being is a conceptual category that is also an epistemological reference as well. Think of those existence that has been marginalized. Let's say there is an invisible line that separates our society into hierarchies, the superiority and the inferiority. Those hierarchies has been reproduced through the centuries. So these power relationships between those who dominate and those who are dominated permeate that invisible line that reproduce violent discourses in society. And those groups, the dominated and the dominant ones, are defined by their linguistic load and their relationship with social representation and how society provides their value. So the importance of evidence and sharing the experience of those groups that are dominated. And these academic spaces allow us to escape this abysmal line that has been suppressed our whole lives. Now, race and gender. So to talk about gender, I want to first share with you how I understand the concept. According to Disegli, gender is understood as a social construct that is based on behaviors, norms, and roles established in society. So gender identity controls and impact the way we interact with others. So on the other hand, race, according to Winant and Howard, can be understood as a sociopolitical concept that shapes and provides interest depending upon the individual human body. And now the perspective of Black English language teachers has been shaped by, English language teaching has been shaped by many perspectives that aim to describe how an English language teacher should talk, teach, and look. Kubota once mentioned that in English language teaching, it is necessary to inquire how social, racial, political, economic, and class dynamic merge to construct the identity, and then affect the teaching and learning process. So all these concepts provide a unique lens through which the complex, multifaceted experience of this educator can be understood and analyzed. So together these constructs offer a cohesive foundation for exploring how Black female students, teachers confront and resist the systemic forces that shape their professional and personal life in educational environments. So how I will recollect this information, how I will provide these testimonials. I will provide these testimonials with the methodology of this study, that is an autoethnograph as a research method, because it's allowed me to explore and interpret and therefore elevate my voice as a Black female English teacher. Autoethnographic perspective provides like an essential platform for my marginalized voice like mine to be heard and valid within academic spaces. By centering my own experiences, I adopt this methodology to contrast with or to try to detach the objective research practices that tend to reinforce those colonial hierarchies. So through autoethnographic, I am able to engage in self-reflection and also in introspection, because it's allowed me to reflect and critically examine my personal experience and therefore see a broader perspective of those social cultural contexts that shape my identities, my narratives, and perspectives about how I interact with the world. And what I'm about to analyze are both instances and memories um, of my Black perspective and as a Black woman. However, I chose to set them as testimonials because it revealed instances of the pain that were inflicted on my body and my Black identity. So I chose to use testimonials as these emerge from the gap that opens between the event and those who survive it, and those who are capable of representing the event. So, nonetheless, these testimonials the are not I'm not intended with these testimonies to reinforce any position as a victim, because I'm not interested to reproduce that dichotomy. Sin On the contrary, I intend to capture the profound sense of desperation that arises from the inability to articulate one's experience. So let me share with you some of my testimonies. Let me give you some context. I am 11 years old. I was in sixth grade, and that was the first time that I felt the prejudice of my skin and how it can be used as a weapon to hurt me. I had a few classmates that did not like me, and therefore they tried to make fun of me. But I didn't pay too many attention to them because it wasn't relevant for me until they start calling me Betun Cherry. For those who doesn't know, Betun Cherry is a product that you use to polish your black shoes. So they compare my skin with something that you use to polish your shoes. I was shocked at first because I was just being mean and they just start calling me names and calling me Betun Cherry and I start laughing like I was a joke. And nobody came to ask me how I felt and everybody laughed. So as a child, I go to my teacher and ask her, and I tell her what was going on and what happened, and she made a meeting with the class, and she started saying that the behavior was unacceptable, and she started saying the right words until she made this separation because she said, if she is Betun Sherry, we are Griffin. And Griffin is a product that you use to clean your white shoes. So again, I was being separated from them. And I think that at that moment, I just feel ashamed. That was the first time that I felt the heaviness of my blackness and the violence that I can experience. Another experience that I had was I was 13 years old and I was on eighth grade and I was going to a park nearby to my school with my friends. We were just having fun. We were all in uniforms, and a lady approached to us running, really, really worried, and she asked them, my friends, if they were okay. And they were like, yeah, we're fine. And she said,
Mhm.
pointing at me, that it's relief because people like me, black people, they were robbing too much. And they start laughing. And I was shocked because I mean, all of us were in uniforms, and it was obvious that I was with them, having fun, playing, and I was a child. But for her, it was like I was robbing them. It's things that we need to start avoiding to happen to our community. I have these memories vivid as it happened over and over and again. And the last one I had with my class at practicum, I had a lot of practice in my degree, but this one it was the most meaningful to share with you today. I was in I was in charge of sixth grade, and my students start asking me if how I, as a black person, know how to speak English so well because they think that black people are just the ones who dance and who shows a reality for instances that are not in academic spaces. So I once started to learn English. I also have an experience at the university when I have this huge presentation in a class and I prepare myself for 2 weeks because speaking in English is hard sometimes. And I did it so well that the teacher congratulated me and gave me the high grade. But then a classmate approached me and said that I don't deserve that grade because I don't speak well, because I have an accent. And of course I have an accent. My parents are from Chocó. So, and I live with them. So did she just expect that I erase them from me? And these are some of the testimonies that I wanted to share with you today. And yeah, I know I should not live through this experience, but are these memories the ones that made me realize the missing path in education about the importance of Black realities? Mm, and the need to educate oneself and others about it. I use these testimonials as a tool to make visible the fight that our students may face in classrooms or in their lives. With my testimonial, I tend to show how I manifested in an ontological way these histories that creates an ontological otherwise, an ontology that is produced by the dominated field of our society, the superiority, and each experience of alienation and fight for acceptance contribute to that point. One of teaching and creating a space where my students can comprehend their privilege and the lack of them, and a place where they can be for them and with others. And here we can have a powerful and meaningful philosophy that is the Ubuntu. I am who I am because of who you are. And it's important to start to confront those spaces and avoid seeing the other, as the less one. So I realized that most important, I have teaching as a source of healing and as a source of creation of new ontological resources. So to conclude, I am in telling my experience, I am not simply narrating personal accounts, but engaging in an epistemic practice that resists mm, the silencing machinery of academic, and is also a theory that is not inherently healing, but is also revolutionary. And by speaking from my position, I make difficult for hegemonic epistemologies that had made Black female subject illegible in teacher education. So by naming this body truth, I hope to create an epistemic practice in the mainstream discourse and invite others who, like me, had been rendered invisible to look at themselves not as a deficit, but as knowers, as thinkers and change makers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Carla, for teacher Carla, for this presentation. It was a very emotional and enlightening presentation. Personally, I really enjoyed it. So, to the audience, I would like to invite you uh, to write your questions, or if in case you want to raise your hands and activate your microphones to ask questions to Carla. Um, we have a first question in the chat, in fact. Um, Professor Juliana Diaz said, well, the research problem that you described, you mentioned your Black identity was not taken into account in your study context curricula. Can you describe how this was evidenced?
Thank you for the question, teacher Juliana. I realize this because in my uh, experience in my curricula, mostly my reference are white and cisgender perspective. Like um, the theories that we analyze are mostly by white and cisgender educators. I don't have, in my experience, any female or black um, resource, an epistemological resource in my curricula. So that was the first time that I realized that the black identity was not taken into account. Secondly, I think that is important to start talking in about black identities in the classroom, even if you don't have students, black students, because they exist. So it is important to start analyzing if you are taking into account things that already exist, just as black identities.
Thank you for your answer. So we have a question by Luz Evelyn Alzate. She says, you were talking about prioritizing Black student experience and importance in the academy. How have you been doing it?
Thank you for the question. It's not just to prioritizing black students' experience, but to acknowledge them. So how I've been doing this in my practicum, I start with my students to share with them that I'm yes, I because they have eyes, they perceive that I'm different from the teacher that they used to have. So I start presenting and share with them black resources that I grab from what I can found because there are lack of black epistemologies there, but I also use my identity and my experience and I create resources. And by resources, I mean I use what I what we perceive that is for Black people and I bring to the classroom. For example, we tend to use or to think that the identity of Black people is happy and dance and all of that, but I also show them resources of people that create knowledge or create different things that they are not used to see in their classrooms. And I bring them to the class. So that's how I've been trying to avoid this lack of Black knowledge on the classrooms, starting with my little ones.
Thank you for your answer. Now, I have a question that I would like to ask you, and is that, well, in fact, I'm doing my PhD studies on racism in language teaching, and I have noticed that these cases of like individual um, racism is more common than we used to think, especially in our context of teaching in Bogota. So, considering these testimonials that you were presenting us, my question is, how can students and teachers resignify these painful experiences so that we create safe spaces in the classroom without never forgetting what happened, but like how we can create these safe spaces for those students that have been going through these situations?
Thank you so much for that question. Is firstly acknowledge that our experience that tend to happen because when we firstly experience racism discourses or racism practices, we tend to normalize them. So firstly, we need to acknowledge that that is not a good thing, and then we create a safe space for them when they feel that they belong and they are not different from the others. I mean, everyone is different to another, but these difference do not separate them, do not show a hierarchy of superiority or inferiority. And I think it's important that us as teachers start to teach ourselves how our narratives and discourses could be unconsciously or consciously permeates those racial discourses. For example, the testimony that I shared that my teacher was trying to do a good thing, but at the same time she separated me. So start think about those minorities, I will say minorities, as part of a community that is there, that is happening. And if you don't have Black students, maybe you teach your students that they are there and they have to start taking them into account when they create something for the class.
Thanks a lot for this beautiful presentation. So I invite everyone to evaluate this presentation. And well, thanks again, Carla, for this amazing presentation. And in 1 minute, we will start with the next presentation. So I want to congratulate you. Right. So, Professor Mateos, I'm gonna make you co-host. All right.
Okay, can I start?
Let's wait 1 more minute so that we can see if we get
Okay,
more audience.
no problem.
All right, thank you. Okay. Well, allow me to introduce Professor and Dr. Mateus Lucas de Almeida. The name of this presentation is The Impact of Genre-Based Language Education on the Written English Proficiency of Bilingual Deaf Students in Recife, Brazil. Uh, Dr. Mateus is a professor in the English language course at the Federal University of Campina Grande. He holds a doctorate in language sciences from the Catholic University of Pernambuco and a bachelor's degree in Portuguese and English from the same institution. He also holds a diploma in English language teaching methodology from the Faculty of Education of São Luís, a master's degree in linguistics and teaching, and a bachelor's degree in Brazilian Sign Language from the Federal University of Paraíba. He has experience in the field of languages and works mainly on the following topics: language education, bilingualism, translanguaging, digital information, and communication technologies, deaf education, additional language acquisition, and education for social justice. So welcome to this presentation. So the room is yours.
First of all, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. The title of my presentation is The Impact of Genre-Based Language Education on the Reading English Proficiency of Bilingual Deaf Learners in Recife, Brazil. So this is basically an extract of my PhD research that I finished at the Catholic University of Pernambuco. And pretty much I decided to research it because right now there is an increased attention to additional languages when it comes to the acquisition by deaf individuals. However, here in Brazil, the most focus is on Portuguese, but English is mandatory as per the National Curricular Common Base. So it's important that we investigate how this process works and how we can actually make it work. In this context, I use a Groham, which says that bilingual education, when it comes to deaf students, is composed by signing and written languages. And in this case here, specifically in the context of Brazil, we have the Brazilian Sign Language, Portuguese, and English, okay? Which shows us that deaf education increasingly embraces multilingualism, and it can provide a great development of students' cognitive skills and also the social ones. So, but then when it comes to this, what kind of problems can we face? So right now, there are three major problems that I identified. The first one is the limited access to effective English instruction, because these students, they are allocated in the classrooms at the regular schools, but they are not actually participating and engaging in the activities because they are tailored to hearing students, which means that the focus is basically in the oral skills and the listening ones. But as they are deaf, this does not respect the needs and specificities. In this context, we understand that it's necessary to think about new pedagogical approaches that actually embrace these students and make them more active learners, right? And for that, of course, we need some specialized teaching strategies and training as well. So there are two questions that I always have in mind when I think about deaf education and actually the teacher of English to the deaf. The first one is the impact on written proficiency, because as I mentioned previously, these students usually do not speak and they have their own language, and this language is a visual one. However, in society, we tend to use oral languages like Portuguese, English, Spanish, and so on. So in this case, thinking about that we need to teach English to them as it's mandatory per law, what can we do and how does genre-based language education influence their accuracy, coherence, and complexity in English writing? The second question that I have here is the student engagement with genre-based instruction. Because I try to identify the learners' attitudes, motivation, interaction partners during these activities. And as the main goal, the main aim of this study, I'd like to try to analyze the impact of the genre-based language education on the written English proficiency of bilingual Brazilian Sign Language and Portuguese deaf students in Recife, Brazil. As my theoretical framework, I take into account Bakhtin's genre theory and the dialogical model proposed by Johnson. So Bakhtin says that the genres are socially constructed kind of established materials that are used to communicate and that we co-construct with others. So in this case, when you think about a learning environment, an English learning environment, actually, I believe that we are makers, we are doers, and the students have to participate in this process. They should be agents and they should have agency in this process as well. And we can use the genres for that because they can propose a greater experience for them. And in this context, Johnson suggests a new model for second language acquisition, in which we have to consider students' sociocultural background. And with that, we can think about genres that might be used with them and that can be useful. So they would engage more in this process, right? I also use here Vygotsky sociocultural theory, because the process was mediated through social interaction. And within the zone of proximal development, I was trying to help students to develop and to develop their knowledge in English and also their social and cultural skills as well. Okay. And I noticed that during this context, the translingualism and the bilingualism were things presented. But what is translingualism? So pretty much it's a dynamic integrated bilingual practice that foster cognitive and linguistic flexibility, which means that as the students have as the first language Brazilian Sign Language, and in Brazil we use Portuguese, they might use these two languages to learn English as well. And the teacher to have in mind that some aspects of one language on another might be transferred throughout this process. Still talking a little bit about Johnson, she says that the language development occurs, the language acquisition occurs from the social cultural settings towards the discursive practices. So which means that depending on where we are located, the things that we do, where we are immersed, we will develop more or less specific aspects of a language. And when we think about deaf students, it's really important, as I mentioned previously, to think about the needs and the specificities that they have. So, in this context, it's really important to think about their subjectivity because their identities are constructed socially. In this case, even though they are deaf students, they have the same disability, they are different. The approach that I use with this specific group of students might not be useful for other group of deaf students as well, because they are different even though they share the same disability. Also, when you think about deaf education, we need to understand that deaf students might transfer the Brazilian Sign Language parameters when learning Portuguese. And also transfer some aspects of Brazilian Sign Language and Portuguese while acquiring English as well. And this happened, as Moraes suggests, as Moraes points out, in three different moments. So during the learning of Portuguese, these students might transfer some aspects of the Brazilian Sign Language, syntax, for example, and when learning English, they might transfer not only the aspects of the Brazilian Sign Language, but also the Portuguese that they learned previously. As the Portuguese and the English kind of have the same role for them. They are foreign languages. So they kind of think that they are different languages apart from their first one. And they tend to transfer some aspects from one to another throughout the acquisition. As I mentioned at the beginning, here in Brazil, the teaching of English is mandatory as per Brazilian National Common Curriculum, which is called BNCC in here. So we have to teach these students. It's not like, oh, do you want to teach deaf students? You don't. Okay, no, it's not like that. They have to be taught at school. They have to learn English, but it's not happening right now qualitatively. So in this context, there are three languages presented: Brazilian Sign Language, Portuguese, and English, being the two later oral languages, and the first one a visual language, which means that the multimodality is going to be presented in this context. And during this process as well, translanguage might occur because these students, when they are not sure about something, when they want to make some questions, when in different moments of the learning process, they might use the Brazilian Sign Language to leverage their the accuracy of English learning. But also, they might use the Portuguese as well, because this mixed process in which we have three languages being used simultaneously, my leverage the repertoire. But talking about the e-study methodology. So it happened in a public school in Recife, Brazil, and I had two elementary and one high school deaf students. Okay, the research is qualitative and follow the tenets of Trivinus, and it's also an action research because I wasn't only observing what was happening, I was also trying to change that environment and trying to make it more meaningful for them. I used workshops, observations, and written students' productions for the data generation, which I'm gonna talk a little bit really soon. And for the content analysis and for the analysis of the materials, I use the content analysis proposed by Bardhan. So, but how did it work? Pretty much, I had 4 workshops, consisted by 4 meetings, lasting between 1 and 20 minutes, 1 hour and 1 hour and 20 minutes, in which I explored 3 different genres: self-introduction, form, and profile. During these meetings, I tried to I was also with the students in the classroom, observing their classes with their own English teacher. And after school hours, I had these 4 workshops. So we kind of, we kind of already had a relationship. In this case, it was easier for me to engage them in this process. I proposed these 4 genres because they are kind of A1 genres, so it would be not that difficult for students. Like they are kind of introductory ones, and they are also useful, so they would engage in this process. And what happened throughout the teaching of this genre? So first of all, I noticed that this my support was really important to build knowledge with them, because I had to repeat and model with them some instructions to facilitate the understanding of these genres. For example, when you think about self-introduction, they need to talk about themselves, and they, of course, can do it really easily with Brazilian Sign Language. But then I asked them to try to do the same with English, and they said that it was difficult, that they couldn't do it, and so on. So I started to introduce some grammatical aspects, some linguistic aspects, to help them to do it. And I did it first. I showed them my own self-introduction, and they were like, wow, this is not that difficult, right? So they kind of checked the model and adjusted. And the scaffolding was really important during this process. I had 3 different students with different English proficiency levels, and also with different Brazilian Sign Language proficiency levels as well. So in this case, there was one specific student that used it to help more the others. And in this process, they were helping each other. And the same thing happened to me, with me. When I wasn't sure about any specific sign in Brazilian Sign Language, they were really happy to help me to understand and to teach me that sign. Because the lessons happen in Brazilian Sign Language. I was signing all the time. But I also had the help of a Libras instructor, okay? During the times that I was in doubt, she helped me to, clarify something better. I also noticed some linguistic transfer during this process. As Brazilian Sign Language is their first language and Portuguese the second one, there were some patterns in syntax, lexicon, and discourse structures that also appeared in the written productions in English. For example, in Brazilian Sign Language, we tend to use this order: object, subject, and verb. It's one of the possibilities, you know? And they tried to do the same thing when they were writing English. So I had to explain to them that it was a different language with a different structure. And I was checking what they knew, what they didn't know. And throughout this process, we were co-constructing together. One specific thing that really caught my attention was during the filling form, because there was a specific space there in which the students had to post that had to place their postcode, but they didn't know what a postcode is, even in Portuguese, Libras, in any language. But they are like 16, 17 years old. And I was, how come? What can you do here now? So I had to stop everything and explain to them the importance of a postcode to localize themselves in the world, to fill in forms, to do things at banks, institutions, school, and so on. I went to Google Maps. I typed their postcode, and well, they understood in the end what it was. But it shows us that teaching a language is not only teach the language, right? It's not only teaching the language, it's something beyond, because it was something really simple that we usually learn like when you are small kids at school, but they didn't, which shows that unfortunately the deaf education in Brazil in that specific context wasn't what it was supposed to be, right? Because students in the end of the elementary school and in high school were not able to do specific small tasks, simple tasks, even though when it was explained in Brazilian Sign Language and in Portuguese as well, and the example was shown in Portuguese. In this context, the materials that I used helped a lot because they had visual aids and also teaching in their first language, this third language. So it's important that we understand that all materials that we teach to the students, all contents, all languages should be taught in their first language, which is the sign language, because it's their natural one. We can do it by ourselves if you know the sign language, or with the help of an interpreter, which is mandatory per law here in Brazil. And the translanguage helped a lot to address structural complexity and the challenges effectively. Define this, right? So the basic self-introductions and genre mastery, students effectively constructed basic self-introductions and demonstrated understanding of formal written genres. So after these only 4 meetings, they were able to write about themselves, to fill in a form, and to understand the importance of these genres on a daily basis, because we kind of have to use them like at the bank, at schools, universities, and so on. So they understood the importance and they were engaged and they were interested in learning more English, because at the beginning of the workshops, they kind of say, no, I don't need to learn that. It's a different language. No, I don't. It's difficult and so on and on. But in the end, they were interested and engaged. But of course, we had to respect their needs and specificities. When they saw that it was possible for them to learn that, they understood that it was a good thing. So there were some improvements in comprehension, and these improvements were linked with the strategic use of visual aids. So every lesson had many visual aids to illustrate better what I was trying to convey to them, right? Because as they have as the first language, a visual language, it helps a lot. And of course, translanguage brings the linguistic gaps. What it means that we can use Portuguese, we can use sign language, we can use American Sign Language, and also English to teach them the third language. In the end, the most important thing is that the students can understand and do effectively the task that was proposed. So what kind of conclusions do I have with this? So first of all, the genre-based instruction um, help to advance deaf learners written English, promoting structured context-relevant language acquisition. The second finding was that Johnson's dialogic model in the translanguage helped to enrich English instruction by integrating dynamic language interactions processes. And also that you need to customize the approaches and the pedagogies that we use in the classroom when you think about this specific group of students, because they have specific needs, they have a different language that has a different modality. So it's really important to take all of these into consideration when teaching English to them. For the future, what I think that should be done is to expand the diversity of genres, use different genres to analyze if this is really effectively or not, to escalate this to a larger group of learners as well. And of course, try to teach during the teacher training, the universities and so on, to the future teachers that this kind of students exist. They are real and that we need to have at least a basic knowledge about these challenges, the needs, and the specificities that we're going to face when we find them in the classroom. Here you can find my references, and that's it. Thank you very much. I hope I did it on time.
Mhm. Thanks a lot, Dr. Lucas. We have a question on the chat. Lucinea Macedo is asking, Mateus, congratulations on your presentation. I have a question. What challenges did you encounter during your research and how did you address them?
Well, the first thing was to find a school with deaf students that were actually participating in the English classes. Because what happens here, even though the law guarantees that these students are there in the school environment, most of them, they quit just because there is no interest in keeping them in there. So it was the first challenge. After that, the second challenge was to find a school with deaf students and with, let's say, a good acceptance from the teachers, the institution, and so on. Because many of them declined to participate because they said that people from the university go to schools just to criticize them, and they do not suggest or promote or help to change the environment. So that's why I employed action research during my PhD, because I wanted to help to change what I knew that it wasn't working really well. So I think that these were the biggest challenges. Dealing with the students wasn't that difficult, because at the beginning they are kind of, oh no, I don't want to learn this, it's not for me, and so on. But once you get them, it's like as any other student, you just need to use the specific strategies that they need. Of course, if I get in a classroom with deaf students and say, okay, let's listen to a song today and do a comprehension activity or something like that. Come on, it's not going to work with them, right? So we need to try to get them closer to us. And once you do it, the process is as with any other student. But of course, we're going to hear teach them the written modality of the language, not the other ones.
Thanks a lot for your response. Diana Garzon is asking, in your experience, wouldn't it be more suitable to promote international science language for deaf students rather than English language for regulars?
Well, so when you think about international signs, international language, that we have international sign language, we need to understand one thing, that people are located socially, right? So it has been tried before, but it didn't work really well when you try to impose one language for a larger group of people. Because the students, they are develop their language, they are acquiring their language within their contexts. So if you say that, okay, let's teach the international sign language may not be that useful for them. One thing that students ask a lot during my master's and my PhD, because I also uh, did, did my master's in the same field, was to teach them American Sign Language. But that's the thing. I don't know American Sign Language because it's another language, right? As Spanish, as English, as Japanese, and so on. So we need to have teachers prepared to teach this language. They cannot just go to the classroom because I have some knowledge in Brazilian Sign Language and I'm an English professor, and you tell them, okay, so I'm going to teach you American Sign Language today. There has to be a preparation for that. Of course, it would be really great to teach American Sign Language to these students, but when it comes to the reality of Brazilian schools, of Brazilian public schools, I don't think that is that possible because at schools they have to learn English, and the modality that's more accessible for them is the written one. Uh, did I answer your question? I'm not sure if I did, but I hope so. You're welcome, Diana.
Sorry.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks for your answer. Um, all right. So we want to thank you for this enlightening presentation, considering the fact that here in Colombia, in many curricula, we do not have this teacher training on how to teach deaf students. So I think that this presentation was very useful for us as teachers of other languages. So thank you so much for this presentation and congratulations. All right. So
Thank you.
now, now we're gonna have our next presenter. I'm gonna make you co-host so you can share your screen. Um, all right. So while Maria shares her screen, I'm gonna introduce her and her presentation. So this presentation is entitled Developing Learner Autonomy in the Foreign Language Classroom by Maria Eduarda Oliveira da Costa. She's a PhD student from the Catholic University of Pernambuco, UNICAP. She holds a master in language science from 2020 and graduated in literature in Portuguese and English from the Catholic University of Pernambuco in 2012. She's currently a professor at UNICAP teaching English, English literature, French and Portuguese for foreigners. She has taught for over 10 years at language schools and bilingual schools and was speaking examiner for the University of Cambridge. She has experience in the field of letters, working mainly in teaching English to children, teenagers in bilingual or non-bilingual contexts, in new methodologies and training English language teachers. So welcome, and the room is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'll be talking about developing learner autonomy in the foreign language classroom which is an extract of my dissertation. And so I'm going to talk about the definition of autonomy that I chose for this study. And I'll be also talking about David Little's principles for autonomy, which are learner empowerment, learner reflection, and target language use. And for that, we'll be talking about the psychoanalytic perspective of Freud and Lacan, and through the views of Reviews, which is basically the only, not going to say the only, but one of the most important authors that study psychoanalysis and second language or foreign language acquisition. And I'll also be describing the autonomous classroom proposed by Lenny Dam, and a few considerations about that, and also a little bit of my experience with autonomous activities for my learners. And so my research objectives is basically the main objective is to explore learner autonomy through the lenses of Vygotsky's social interactionism and Freudian and Lacanian psychoanalysis with reference to Dam's autonomous classroom. So why I thought of this theme, the theme of learner autonomy. As in my introduction, I've been teaching for over 10 years. It's actually 15 years. And I've worked in bilingual schools and English language schools. And now I'm working at university. And I always thought that learners could benefit from developing learner autonomy. And one day I was doing a revision in one of my classes, and I let them choose the activities they wanted. So I prepared a few worksheets on different topics that we had been studying. For instance, present simple, present continuous, and comparatives. And I told my students, you're going to choose the topic that you have more doubts, more questions, and you start with the topic that you want to explore first. If you think one topic is too easy, you will choose the other one. And one of my students was impressed, and he said, really, we can choose? So that really informed me that learners are rarely given the opportunity to choose and to reflect on what they learned. And in this class, they really reflected on, oh, what is easy for me, what is difficult for me, and that was an interesting thing to observe. And so what I observed also, and the studies of Little and Benson kind of talk about that many learners resist taking control of their learning due to passive schooling models. So we have schooling methodologies, teaching methodologies centered on the teacher, and they don't allow for the students to take control of their learning process. And the barriers also lie in teaching routines. So they are centered in teaching routines and not in learners' ability. And also there is a need to further investigation into the notion of control, because for Vygotsky's theory, learners should be able to take control over their learning. And however, for psychoanalysis, this isn't the case. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So for my theoretical framework, I use the theories of learner autonomy from Benson, from David Leto, and from Vygotsky, with the principals and the teacher's role, and the autonomous classroom from Lenny Dam. She had an interesting experience, and David Little, he also further investigates in a more theoretical analysis, and also the role of the mother language through the sociocultural theory of Vygotsky and the psychoanalysis of Freud and Lacan. So I chose, there are many concepts, there are many authors who tried to define learner autonomy, but for this study I chose autonomy from Benson. He describes it as the capacity to take control over one's own learning. So for him, there are many dimensions of control that the learner can tackle. So the learning objectives, so the learner could control their objectives, the content and the progress, the methods and techniques, and monitoring and evaluation of their own learning. So Benson chooses control over some terms that other authors use as responsibility or taking charge, because it's more open to empirical investigation. And also there is a difference between language learning autonomy and autonomy in language use that is important to talk about. And however, both are essential for successful learning. So language learning autonomy means taking charge or having some degree of control over the learning process. And autonomy in language use means that you can manipulate language to your own communicative needs. So both of these dimensions, they could be developed through social and interactional processes. So with that, David Little proposes 3 pedagogical principles that are: the first one, learner involvement. So the learner needs to take responsibility for learning. There should be a focus on peer interaction and teacher mediation. So instead of teacher-centered methodology, the learner would be the center of the learning process. And learner reflection, so the learner should be able to do self-assessment, to check, to set their own goals and analyze them critically. And this could be done, for instance, through reflective journals and learning portfolios. And I'll be showing in a few moments also some checklists that could be done with to check as a means of self-assessment. And there is also the appropriate target language use. So in this case, I'm talking about English, was the language that I was focusing on in this study, but also this could be done with any foreign language, French or Spanish. But anyway, so language is a medium for learning, and the emphasis would be on the communicative competence. These 3 principles, they emphasize the active learner role. So they are all centered on the learner. And then it's important to talk about the target language use that is key to communicative competence. And we see in learner autonomy language learning as a dialogical process. So learners need to talk, to speak, and to interact in the classroom. And so interaction is essential to the development of autonomy. And one of the common teachers' concern that were shown in different studies was that students can't reflect in L2, but this is shown that they can. I'm going to give you a few examples in a moment, but students can reflect in L2 from the simplest levels, from the most basic levels. So, for example, with can-do statements. So, I can count from 1 to 10 in English. So show me you can count from 1 to 10 in English, and then the child can say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then yes, I can, and tick that goal. So that is a very simple way to show that students can reflect in L2. And so Little says that it's possible with the right strategies. So mainly he proposes group work, scaffolding, so with peers that are more or less capable working together, and the progressive use of L2 for planning, reflecting, and evaluating. So beginning with less complex can-do statements, for example, and then progressing to learning journals and actually writing about the learning process. And then let's go to the discussion part. And now I'll be talking a little bit more about the Vygotskian view and the psychoanalytical view. For Vygotsky, for the researchers that draw on Vygotskian theory, autonomy develops socially via interaction. Whereas for psychoanalysis, the subject is driven by the unconscious. So there is a divergence in these theories because control is either a conscious skill or unconsciously mediated. And for Benson, he says that learners exert control naturally without training. And however, for Lacan, the unconscious is structured like a language. So autonomy may be influenced by unconscious drive and not be fully rational according to that view. So learners wouldn't be 100% in control of their learning process and language use. So this apparent control, according to psychoanalysis, could mask some unconscious tensions. And so psychoanalysis questions the very possibility of full control. So it's something to think about because it shakes a little bit the theory regarding autonomy, and it brings an interesting perspective. So the autonomous classroom draws on the Vygotskian sociocultural theory, and Lenny Dam, she proposed, she had a mixed level class of Danish children using the communicative approach. And the key aspects that Little observed while analyzing Dam's experiment was that English was used from day one, even in the most basic levels. So even if some translation was needed, but English was encouraged to be used from day one, but it wasn't forbidden to speak L1. And students chose and evaluated activities. So they informed the teacher which activities worked, which didn't work. There were personal and group goal setting because students were seen as individuals, and students kept learning notebooks, which is really useful because they could see from the first writing they could write only a few words or a few sentences, they could see in the end how they were able to write more complex texts in different genres. And there were regular evaluations by students and teachers as well. And then as a result, the autonomous classroom showed that students developed fluency, vocabulary, and accuracy in English. It lasted for a year, this experience. And autonomy was developed collaboratively, not individually. And according to Lenny Dam, children can be autonomous with proper support. And it showed the social cultural theory of Vygotsky in practice. And also she highlights that peer interaction and guided reflection were essential to the development of autonomy. And here are some practical examples with a class that I had during the pandemic. Some of these activities were also done online in synchronous classes. So in our class, in my classes, I used to do class contracts and personal contracts. So students chose their goals. So here's an example. It would be also like behavioral goal as well. For example, to wear the mask, bring the books, the pencil, and also to speak English and do the homework. And then they would have more specific goals, more individual goals in their own personal notebooks. And also, I would let learners choose the activities, for example, in the example I gave in the beginning, for revision purposes based on self-evaluation. And so some books, some materials, they have these self-reflection activities that are often ignored by the teachers, or we don't have time to do them. So they could simply, in 5 minutes, we can say, I can say the alphabet in English, let's see. And then learners could repeat the alphabet or sing the song in English, and they tick themselves on the notebook to check, or they could do testing each other. It's possible also to gamify this activity as well. And also to keep a learning journal. So this is something I like to do even with students at university levels. And then this is another activity where they reflect on their confidence, their likes and dislikes regarding English. And here, for example, this student wrote a few sentences, and here she wrote more complex analysis of her English practice. Yes. And then there is also something important regarding those two theories. It's the role of the mother tongue, because in the communicative approach, sometimes in the past, yes, nowadays it's changing a little bit, but the first language use was forbidden. And for Vygotsky and for other theories, the first language is actually a tool for thought and problem solving, so it should be encouraged. And it's something that both theories have in common, that psychoanalysis views L1 as the language of desire that shapes the subject. So even though they have different conceptions of language and different views of learning, this relationship with the mother tongue is viewed in a similar way, that it should be encouraged. And then, so the role of the mother tongue in Dam's classroom, students reflect on themselves via the foreign language. The translation activities allowed for self-expression and estrangement. So the foreign language shapes perception, language, and identity. And the foreign language could be seen as a space for freedom and reinvention of the self. And the conclusion of this study, it leads to a few reflections. How could we explore learner autonomy through the lenses of Vygotsky's and Freudian Lacanian psychoanalysis with reference to the autonomous classroom? So we can see that autonomy requires conscious choices, but unconscious elements also influence learning. And so the question that I leave is that how can teachers support learners when barriers are beyond rational control? And we also saw a successful model of autonomous classroom by Lenny Dam, where the mother tongue was used as a pedagogical ally, and even though it's not psychoanalytically framed. In psychoanalysis, L1 involves the body. Yeah, so it's a discomfort to speak a foreign language because the pronunciation is different. So in the beginning, it really affects the learner as a subject. And how could autonomy be reframed through the lens of the body? And the unconscious is the last question. If Dam's approach could be expanded through a psychoanalytic lens. So these are my references, and thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor, for this great presentation on autonomy. So we have a few questions. We have a few minutes for questions. The first question is by Lucinea. She is asking, did you create these activities?
If the activities that I showed in the slides, yes, I did with my students, and they are from my personal files that I created. Only the can-do statements were taken from some material that I have, but I just had the print screen there from the pandemic classes. So yes.
Great. We have a question, and it's like, given the emphasis on bodily manifestations and unconscious processes, how should teacher training evolve to help educators recognize and respond to these less visible aspects of learner autonomy?
Yes. Thank you for the question. It's important to, I believe, to observe the students who show some difficulty or who have, for example, they also express verbally their discomfort. So I can't pronounce this, I don't understand this. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they are more quiet. And I believe it's important to consider the class as a whole, of course, by setting the goals for the whole class, but also the psychoanalytical theory helps us consider each individual as a subject that is different, even though the what we are teaching is the same. Yes, we are teaching the present simple, present continuous, the vocabulary, but each person is going to respond differently. And what psychoanalysis says is that the relationship with the mother tongue is going to shape the relationship with the foreign language. So there may be aspects that are beyond our control. And what we can do is actually listen to the child. So let's practice this sound. I know it's uncomfortable to pronounce different words. I know it can be difficult for us, and also acknowledge the difference between both languages. Yeah? So we understand that some sounds are more difficult for Portuguese speakers, for Spanish speakers. So these are important considerations to have.
Thank you. So another question we have is like this DAMS classroom model focuses a lot on students' reflection and planning. So do you think this approach sufficiently addresses the learner's unconscious dimensions, or are there limits from a psychoanalytic standpoint?
I believe there are limits because it's not a closed space as, for example, the doctor's, the psychologist's office would be. So learners may not be able to fully express themselves, but psychoanalysis actually says that we cannot. But I believe it's important to actually the one of the activities that really informs us about the self-expression are the journals and the diaries and the things that the learners write when they have a few time their own time, right, for individual activities or writing activities. I believe that's when we can notice these aspects, and it's a matter of being sensible, of really paying attention.
All right, thank you. And our last question is by Diana Garzon. Have you found insights or relations between the autonomy and social media? If so, do you consider social media an advantage or disadvantage?
Um, I haven't actually thought of social media, but I've been researching recently artificial intelligence. I believe that's a nice tool for developing autonomy. With social media, I believe there are many aspects for communication. For example, you can find influencers on that speak English, that gives English tips and try to interact. So it's a nice way of autonomously using the language to for self-expression through social media. So, yes, there's a potential. I can see a potential to that. Thanks for the question.
Right. Thanks a lot for this presentation. There are very positive comments about this great presentation. So I would like to invite the audience to, well, to have the lunch break or the general break if you're abroad. And it's gonna take 1 hour, so we'll meet at 2:15 Colombian hour on YouTube. So thanks a lot for being here, and thank you, Duda, for being here as well. Okay, so bye bye, everyone.